Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Abramson. You might be wondering why I am dressed like this, and honestly, I wanted to give you the most realistic picture as possible. One of my favorite things in life is my family. My mom is originally from Illinois, and my dad is from Boston, and so I was obviously born and raised in the Boston, southern New Hampshire area. It was super hard being away from my family in Illinois with my mom. We would go back to Illinois about once a year to visit my grandparents, her parents, and then she had three sisters in that family. Every time we would go to Illinois, one of my favorite memories was running up to my grandparents' house and running into the arms of my grandma and then eventually my grandpa. But my grandma was definitely the one who was more affectionate and outgoing and loving. And one of my earliest memories I have of her is her sitting in her armchair and doing something called cross stitching. Cross stitching is something that she loved to do. It was one of her relaxing pastimes to do as she was sitting in a chair. And I remember she started to teach me how to do it when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And that would kind of be our thing every time I would visit her or she would come out to New Hampshire and visit us. We would sit on the couch and we would cross stitch together. She would cross stitch these beautiful pieces, and I would be struggling to just do a couple stitches on mine. When I got older, I fell out of doing cross stitching, and it didn't happen until after she passed away about 9 years ago that I really got back into it. As an adult, I've also suffered from some anxiety, and I find that cross stitching and even knitting really help kind of calm me down and help kind of as like a therapy for me. So if you don't know what cross stitching is, it uses a piece of thread. Now remember to call this thread and not yarn. That is something my grandma was very adamant about. And then you have this cloth. It's called Aida cloth, and it comes in different kind of stitches. So you have like 12 count, 14 count, 16 count, and that's how many holes there are per inch. And then obviously the most important piece is the little needle. I do have to say the needles my grandma used were very pointy and stabby, but I think since then they've definitely dulled down the point. I do remember when I used to cross stitch with my grandma, though, I would get a lot of bloody fingers here and there. And some of the things that she made me was she made one of these for me, and she put a magnet on the back. Now, the back side of the cross stitch, hers were always really neat. Mine are not, and I don't think they ever will be. And then a few years ago when I started to do it, I decided to follow a pattern. This was when I had my first ever panic attack in London, so I came home early, and that summer I just got back into cross stitching and I really enjoyed it. So I did this one, which is the continents of the world, which I am extremely proud of. And one other thing I did with cross stitching, I made a little Pikachu for my brother, was I started designing my own patterns on a free app online. So one of them I made was this little design. And then I also made this design. So I am going to try and attempt to show you how to cross stitch. And I am going to show you the very basics because that's all I knew how to do for a number of years when I first learned with her. You do really follow a pattern, but for this purpose, I'm just going to show you how to make the actual pieces. So the first thing you need is you need your needle. And on the needle, there's a little tiny hole called the eyelet, and that is where your thread goes through. It is really tricky to thread into the needle. And so what my grandma taught me to do, which I don't know how sanitary it is, but it works. So you want to hold the needle with your eyelet there, and then take your thread, put it through your lip so it gets a little wet. And then you want to line them up and put it through. And again, extremely tricky, extremely frustrating, Probably my least favorite part of it. But once you get it through, you feel pretty good about yourself. So once it's through, you want to pull it down to about there. And now you have your needle. Now, you're going to take your fabric and you're going to choose a hole, any hole, and you're going to stab the needle through that hole. Like that. And since this is the first stitch, you need to secure it. So you're going to pull the needle through. And on the back side, so once you pull your needle through the thread and the hole, you're going to make a diagonal line. So you're going to go to the whole diagonal up one. And again, it's very small, so hard to see, but just remember you want to do a diagonal up. And you see on the back side, your needle is there. And you want to find a little hole here that you're going to slip it through. So essentially, you're making a knot like so. Like that. And if you look at the front side, you just made a diagonal. And what you'll end up doing is making X's. And I recommend just attempting to make X's. Doesn't matter if it's even the correct X, doesn't matter what it looks like, but you're just practicing the art of threading and cross stitching. And eventually, once you're able to make the X's, you can go to the local craft store and buy a really simple pattern and you can try and make it. It's a really hard craft, but one that I really cherish because it does bring me closer to my grandmother. Thank you, and I hope you have a good evening.